Good day everyone, my name is Jillian Jubel Chong and I'm one of the reporters that will tackle about writing. Today, we are going to learn all about the history of writing. We all know that both writing and reading are really important in our education because thanks to them, we can learn many new exciting things. But have you ever asked yourself how writing was created? To organize. This way, everything will be reflected somewhere physically. The first form of writing that existed were the pictograms, also known as ideograms. As you can see, they were drawings. Examples: if they wanted to represent the sun, the heat, or light, they drew a sun. These are a few examples: fish, bird, man, and flower. Their origin was in Mesopotamia and Egypt back in the year 4000 BC. But there are things that can't be described through drawing, and that is why the Sumerians needed to invent the syllabic system which divided each word by cuneiform signs. Still nowadays, both in China and Japan, they continue to use similar type of writing. In the past, at the beginning of writing, paper didn't exist, so other materials were used to write on such as stone, wood, or clay. The Romans, for example, wrote on large stone monuments to make sure their messages would last a long time. The Egyptians were the first to invent something similar to paper by using the stem of an aquatic plant. Sheets were made and then written on it. It was called papyrus. This was written by someone thousands of years ago in the 8th century. The Arabs introduced paper into Europe. But what really made the evolution of the history of writing and reading was the invention of the printing press in the year 4040. Johannes Gutenberg was the creator, and up until then, all books had to be copied by hand using ink and word feathers, and it took a very long time. With printing, everything is now so much faster. After the other things were invented, such as pencils, pens, typewriters, today we read and write using computers, tablets, and mobile phones. These technological changes are creating a fantastic change in the history of writing, and yet they do not change what is most important, as we mentioned at the beginning of the video. Reading and writing are fundamental to our education.
Good day, my name is Dalia T. Arsha and my report is about syllabic writing. What is syllabic writing? Syllabic writing is a writing system that employs a set of symbols, each one representing the pronunciation of a syllable. What are the examples of syllabic writing? Japanese syllabary, an example of a script in which each symbol normally represents a syllable, is the hiragana syllabary of Japanese. A syllabary system uses single symbol to represent a spoken syllable, often using puns in which a syllable can also be a word. Each symbol stands for a consonant plus a vowel that represent a single syllable. Our next example is Cherokee syllabary. In the early 19th century, Sequoyah devised a syllabic writing system for his native Cherokee language. The creation of this script, commonly referred to as the Cherokee syllabary. The written symbol in each case does not correspond to a single consonant or a vowel but to a syllable.
Hi everyone, I am Lishana Gil Campanero and I'm about to discuss logographic. In logographic writing, Symbols represent morphemes or words. If a character represents a meaningful unit, such as a morpheme or a word, the orthography is called the logographic writing system. Around 4,000 years ago in China, a new writing system was developed that used symbols to represent words, not syllables. A logographic writing system differed fundamentally from the Sumerian Akkadian syllabic system. Partly for this reason, it is believed that the Chinese did not borrow the idea of writing from the Mesopotamians, but developed it on their own. Like the ancient Middle Eastern syllabic writing, the Chinese logographic system is originated in ideograms. There are three variants, which are pictographic, ideographic, and abstract logographic. First is the pictographic, a picture representing a word, phrase, or idea, especially one used in early writing systems. Next is the ideographic, which a character or symbol representing an idea or a thing without expressing the pronunciation of a particular word or words for it. Lastly, the abstract logographic. Its meaning is no longer identifiable from their shape. Let's now proceed with the Chinese logographic system. The clearest example of logographic writing, Chinese, consists not only characters representing meanings, but also of secondary characters based on sound similarity for representing meanings that were difficult to picture. It therefore relies upon both word-based and sound-based principles. Most modern Chinese characters can be decomposed into two elements. One is called the radical or signific and can sometimes hint at meaning. The other, of which there are many types, can sometimes give a clue to pronunciation and is known as phonetic. There are two types of syllabary, which are, first, the bisyllabary, which the direction of writing is from left to right in horizontal lines. Next is the Tamil syllabary, which is also from left to right in horizontal lines. The bisyllabary. In bisyllabary, each symbol represents a consonant plus a vowel, while in Tamil syllabary, when they appear at the beginning of a syllable, vowels are written as independent letters. Though several transcription systems have been devised for Chinese, the logographic system continues to survive after 4,000 years. You might wonder why such a seemingly impractical and complex system would endure for so long. Well, the Chinese logographic system has a number of important advantages. The first stems from the fact that though there are many homophonous words in Chinese, they usually have different written representations. Thus, the Chinese character system provides a way of distinguishing among written words that a syllabic system or an alphabet could not provide. The second major advantage of Chinese logographic system is peculiar to the Chinese situation. Chinese is actually a set of spoken dialects, some of which are mutually intelligible, some of which are not. Fortunately, in written communication, all these dialects use the same set of characters. Modern Chinese characters. In an ideal logographic system, each word of the spoken language would be represented by a different graphic symbol, in that a portion of its vocabulary is represented by individual characters. Here are examples of modern characters. In Chinese, morphemes can combine to form compounds that denote new ideas whose meaning are more or less clearly related to the meaning of the parts. Of course, this is reflected by corresponding compounds in writing. Though compounding greatly reduces the number of characters needed in the common use, learning to read and write the Chinese logographic system is a formidable task, considerably more difficult and time-consuming than learning the Vai or Tamil syllabary, or the English alphabet. Bear in mind that since modern characters provide reader little information as to the pronunciation or meaning of the words they represent, learning to read and write Chinese involves learning the shape of characters as well as their meaning and pronunciation.
Hi guys, my name is Jillian Chibechong and I will be the one to report about orthography. Language is important. It's how we communicate, how we express our ideas, and how we define ourselves to others. Scientists are always amazed at the power of language to actually define the ways that we think. That's a cool idea, but are they talking about spoken language or written language? Yes, they're different things. A spoken language is a complex, living system of communication used by all the people who are able to understand it to share ideas, emotions, and information. It is adaptive, capable of changing rapidly, and infinitely complex. However, human groups across history have realized that being able to record information is also pretty useful, so they have developed ways of writing their languages down. A written language is what some linguists call an artifact of culture. It's created intentionally but can never truly represent the entire scope of a spoken language. Just look at this text. The letters before you are symbols, visual representations of sounds in our language. But can you interpret my body language as you read this? Or my vocal inflections or tones? Written languages aren't perfect duplicates of spoken language, but they don't have to be. They just have to be good enough to represent a spoken language. This means they have to be simple enough to use, but also complex enough to represent everything we are capable of saying. The result is a system called an orthography. An orthography is a standardized system of writing. It's the collection of rules that let us visually represent a language. This starts with creating the symbols upon which a written language is built. One of the earliest ways to do this was to use symbols to represent entire words or ideas. We call this a logographic orthography. Perhaps the most obvious example would be Egyptian hieroglyphs, but Chinese characters and Japanese kanji are technically logograms as well. They're symbols representing an entire word. This writing system is direct, but can also be very extensive, with new characters being needed for every new word. For example, in order to be literate in written Chinese, you would need to learn between 3 and 4,000 individual symbols, and more than 50,000 logograms for this language have been created. Orthographies that do not represent entire words in this way may break their languages into syllables. A system based on symbols for syllabic sounds is often called a syllabic orthography. This system, which requires fewer characters than a logographic one, is almost as old. Cuneiform, one of the world's first written scripts, which was developed by Mesopotamian peoples, included syllabic elements in its orthography. The last major type of orthography is alphabetic, in which the visual symbols represent individual sounds in spoken language and not syllables or words. This concept should seem familiar. You're reading an alphabetic language right now. The Greek and Latin alphabets are considered true alphabets because they explicitly include symbols for vowel and consonant sounds, but not every alphabetic system is like ours. Arabic and Hebrew, for example, are called consonantal alphabets because their symbols only represent the consonants. There are no letters for vowels. In Arabic, those dots and dashes above or below the letters let you know which vowel sound accompanies the consonant.
Developing writing systems in newly literate societies. The 20th century witnessed an astonishing increase in communication among regions, countries and continents. Oceans and mountains, challenging obstacles only 100 years ago, are now easily overflown. There is probably not a single inhabited area of the world that has had no contact with the outside. This is a remarkable fact, given that as recently as the 1950s, large inhabited areas of Papua New Guinea, Amazonia, and the Philippines remained completely isolated from the rest of the world. One consequence of this communications boom is that many people who had never seen writing a few decades ago are now literate. When a language is written down for the first time, a number of important questions arise. First, what kind of writing system should be used? Second, how should the system be modified or adapted to fit the shape of the language and the needs of its speakers? And lastly, who makes these decisions? All present-day languages, including those of hunter-gatherer cultures, have lots of words, can be used to talk about anything under the sun, and can express negation. As far back as we have written records of human language, 5,000 years or so, things look basically the same. Languages changes gradually over time, sometimes due to changes in culture and fashion, sometimes in response to contact with other languages. But the basic architecture and expressive power of language stays the same.
At times, a society may change from one writing system to another. Vietnam, for example, was colonized by the Chinese around 200 BC and remained colonized for about 12 centuries. During that time, Chinese was used for writing, while Vietnamese remained unwritten. After the end of Chinese domination, the Vietnamese began to use a syllabic writing system adopted from Chinese logographic writing for their own language. Then, at the beginning of the 17th century, Jesuit missionaries devised an alphabetic system for Vietnamese, which the Vietnamese gradually adopted, partly under pressure from the French colonial government. One thorny problem that newly literate societies face is developing a standard orthography that everyone will agree to use. Ideally, an orthography must be regular, so native writers will be able to spell a word that they have never before seen in writing. The orthography must also be easy to learn and use. Finally, it must be well adapted to the phonological and morphological structure of the language. As we saw in our discussion of English orthographies, it's tough to satisfy all those requirements. A system that looks complex at first blush can have hidden advantages. Devising a standard orthography can be such a difficult task that a few Western nations, including Norway, have not yet done so, even after countries of literacy.
Language-related concerns are not the only factors involved in devising orthographies. An important factor is social acceptance. An orthography that, for any reason, rubs users the wrong way is unlikely to succeed. If the orthography is imposed by an outside political or religious body, it may carry negative associations and never succeed. For several decades, the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs or BIA hired linguists and anthropologists to devise orthographies for native languages. But because the Indians viewed BIA and its activities with suspicion, they never really accepted its orthographies. Likewise, at the end of the 19th century, Methodist and Catholic missionaries devised different orthographies to transcribe Rotuman, the language of the South Pacific island of Rotuma. Since then, with relations between Methodist Rotumans and Catholic Rotumans strained, both orthographies have survived. and there is little or no prospect of either group adopting the other's orthography. Similar situations can involve not only orthographies but writing systems. In Serbia and Croatia, a single language is used, but the Serbs use a Cyrillic alphabet similar to that used for Russian, while the Croats use the Roman alphabet. Even when they were united in a single country, both groups adamantly kept their own alphabet as a symbol of social identity. Clearly, social acceptance is extremely important to the development of a standard orthography. And for my understanding, social acceptance is a key for orthographies to survive. For this, it needs to be convincing and willing to include suggestions and hear opinions from the people to be imposed to. Between groups that establish orthographies, there are little or no chance at all of being united because such adjustments should be done which can make the orthographies complicated to one that is already established.